There's a longstanding belief in sales and marketing, especially on the consumer side, but you see this on the B2B or business to business side as well, that the customer is always right. And this shows up in things like customer centricity, which I've talked about in a previous episode, where we put the customer at the center of everything we do, and we build our entire strategy around being responsive to whatever their needs may be, what they tell us their challenges are. They tell us about the solutions that they're seeking. They tell us about how they want to be served, how much they want to pay, you name it. And what's interesting is what's shown up in so much of the research that I've been involved in over the years is a really interesting counterintuitive kind of perspective that kind of takes that perspective that the customer is always right and stands it on its head. Because what I've found is that more often than not, it's not that the customer is always right. It's actually that the customer is rarely right, or maybe rarely completely right, that they actually often struggle and they really don't always know exactly what they're doing. And I say that with deep respect and love for customers, of course, but they're human beings like the rest of us, because we're all customers, we're all humans, and we all kind of struggle. And when you take that perspective, rather than taking as a given that the customer knows exactly what they're doing, you take it as a given that customers actually aren't quite sure, then you open up all sorts of really interesting opportunities to be incredibly helpful. So let's talk about just a couple dimensions along which customers may not, in fact, be right. One is around the challenges and opportunities they face as a company. So they may come to you and say, "We need a solution," and you ask them why. You do your due diligence, you do your discovery, and it turns out you think that's not what you need at all, right? But they're pretty convinced of it. That they may think they're right, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, from an objective perspective, that is the best course of action. So there's an opportunity there to share with them new perspectives, to teach them something new, to challenge their thinking, right? To give them a new way to think about making money, saving money, mitigating risk that they haven't fully appreciated. That, of course, is the entire basis of all of the work that we discovered through all of that data in the Challenger Sale book, is this idea that you can actually challenge customers' thinking. And that's an opportunity that they aren't in fact right. But since that time, we've kind of uncovered all sorts of other dimensions along which that same dynamic plays out. So, for example, um, when you think about sort of the needs that they have, so you take for example the idea of discovery, and I've talked about this in previous episodes. We train our sales reps to go discover our customers' needs, to go identify their deepest challenges, or the way that it's articulated more often than not today is in terms of customer outcomes. So go identify the customer outcomes. But why should we necessarily take it at face value that whatever outcomes they say, in fact, they're pursuing are, in fact, the best outcomes for them to pursue? There is perhaps surface area, not always, or opportunity to provide alternate perspectives, or to supplemental perspectives based not just on our own opinion, but maybe on what other companies like them have experienced in recent times or in the recent past. But beyond that, yet another dimension is along the purchase journey, right? So particularly in marketing, we've been talking about mapping the customer buying journey for the better part of the last, I don't know what, 15 years at least, right? And it often starts with you. I literally had a head of sales tell me once that the way we do that is we sit down with our customer with a blank piece of paper and say, "Could you just draw out the process by which you're going to make this decision?" And something we've learned there over and over again that's tied back to all the work we did around buyer enablement, and it's in the Harvard Business Review under the new sales imperative article, is that customers actually struggle pretty mightily with their buying process. They don't know who should be involved. They don't know when they should be involved. They don't necessarily know how the questions that should be asked or answered, for that matter. And so, and again, in previous episodes of the breakdown, we've talked about sort of how you can provide a role as guide to effectively take your customer figuratively by the hand and guide them through not just the journey of buying from you, but their own internal purchase journey. You know better how they could navigate their own internal decision-making process than they do themselves quite often. And then there's this question of, the customer, well, certainly they're right in terms of how they define value. Well, maybe not, because how they define value is kind of one of those things that where you stand depends on where you sit. And different stakeholders across that same customer organization are going to define value in very different ways, depending on what's most important for their particular dashboard or the specific metrics that they're pursuing on behalf of their company. And oftentimes, it's not just that they're not sure what those metrics might be or what those metrics could be. They're not sure how to take their dashboard and marry it up with their colleague's dashboard to find a single dashboard that is a single version of the truth that makes sense, that everyone can agree on. And you can help there. You can help by aligning and helping teach them not more about you, but about themselves, and showing them, like, procurement's thinking like this. And I just talked to your legal team and they're asking these questions. Let's see if we can align all of you around a common version of objectives and tactics and metrics and targets and timelines, because each one of those, as we've talked about before, provides an opportunity or surface area for disagreement or at least for disconnect. And that, if customers are so likely to find disconnect in their buying journey, to find disconnect in what they're trying to do, or to overlook opportunities that otherwise could help them greatly, if they struggle to define value, it's weird to kind of come at selling and marketing from the perspective of the customer's always right, because you're just completely limiting your opportunities to be helpful. And it's, because I'm a researcher, I tend to talk somewhat or speak somewhat polemically. So the customer's rarely right. They're always wrong. That's not the posture I'm necessarily suggesting. What I'm suggesting is that the customer, whether they fully recognize it or not, or whether they're actually seeking it from you or not, the customer actually oftentimes needs help across a wide range of dimensions, whether it's identifying business strategy, whether it's aligning around value, whether it's navigating decision-making process. We haven't even gotten to implementation yet. It's a whole nother dimension along which this also plays out. I think it's a really interesting opportunity for all of us as we seek to differentiate ourselves to adopt a posture not that the customer is right, but the customer needs help. And think about all those dimensions along which you might be helpful, where they may not be right, and they may not even realize that they're right or not right. But then approach those conversations with empathy, with a certain amount of care, right? The full frontal assault of, oh, that's a bad idea is probably not a good idea, right? So to do it Socratically, we've also talked about that in other videos. So, but at a high level, I just find this really interesting. So I'm up in altitude in this episode, but I just find this sort of posture to be not only really interesting, but to actually be very helpful and productive to think about what are the dimensions along which the customer may in fact not actually be right. That is an incredibly productive thought exercise that you and your teams can engage in to provide surface area for you and your teams to stand out, to provide help in a way that maybe no one else is. And that's a great place to be.